What is going on? It is Nate the Game Guy coming back with another video at hand, and today I want to talk to you guys about the Nokia N-Gage. Now, the Nokia N-Gage was a very interesting piece of gaming history. After all, this thing came out during a time when playing games on a cell phone was a pretty brand new concept. Now, when Nokia came out with this, they wanted to advertise this thing and market this thing as a gaming handheld that was also a cell phone, and this thing was meant to be a competitor to the Game Boy Advance at the time. Now, while the handheld itself would not necessarily see a lot of success, it is an interesting piece of gaming history to collect for. After all, I have an almost complete Nokia N-Gage set. I'm just missing one game that I just simply can't find on the internet. But today, we're going to take a look at the problems that you will face when collecting for Nokia's cell phone-based handheld. Now, I won't cover every single problem about this handheld in this video, but I will talk about some of the few common problems that I can think of when it comes to collecting for this handheld. So, without further ado, let's take a look at some of the problems that you can encounter when you are playing and collecting for the Nokia N-Gage right after the intro. Alright, so the first problem that I want to talk about when it comes to playing and collecting for the Nokia N-Gage is the fact that you are going to need a SIM card in order to get this thing to play a game. Now, thankfully, you do not need to go to your cell phone provider and get a brand new cell phone contract. It's not like you got to hit up Verizon and try to get an active SIM card for the N-Gage. Thankfully, what's really nice about the N-Gage is the fact that you just need is a dummy SIM card. Literally, it could just be just any old SIM card just laying around that fits into the N-Gage. As long as it's a SIM card and it fits into the slot, you're good to go. It's just a pretty dumb thing that unfortunately, you literally cannot use this thing and play any games without a SIM card in it. Pretty dumb if you ask me on Nokia's part, but thank God, as the years have gone by, that, like I said, you do not need an active SIM card. You don't need to go out and get a cell phone contract. If you just want to buy some empty or blank SIM card off of eBay or whatever, right? Just buy it, pop it in, you're good to go. But that is a big thing that you got to keep in mind if you plan on using the N-Gage, is that you got to have a SIM card. Thankfully, as mentioned from before, doesn't need to be working, but you got to put that SIM card in there in order to play this thing. So another problem that's worth talking about when it comes to collecting for the Nokia N-Gage is the fact that these games are not really the easiest games to find. Now, let's face it, the chances of you finding an N-Gage game at a yard sale, a thrift store, even a local mom and pop game store for that matter, is pretty darn slim. Let's face it, the reality is if you are going to be collecting for the N-Gage, realistically, you're probably going to have to go on like eBay or Mercari or Amazon, is just because the chances of you finding it locally are just very slim. After all, we are talking about a handheld game console from the 2000s that really did not see a lot of success. And of course, since we are talking about a console that didn't sell well to begin with, it only makes sense that the games are also going to be fewer out there as well. After all, less consoles being sold means less games being bought, which means in the future or the present day, right, that the inventory is going to be very, very low. I can truthfully tell you, with my N-Gage collection, I've essentially bought all of them online. It's just simply because, like I said, the reality is you're just not really going to be finding these games locally. Of course, there is still that very, 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 very slim chance that you might be able to find some of these games locally. But let's face it, I wouldn't recommend that you get up early to go to a yard sale to try to find an N-Gage game. The chances are just too low. I wouldn't even bother doing it. But if you are planning to collect for the N-Gage, the reality is you're probably going to be shopping online to pick up some of those games for your N-Gage collection. Now, of course, talking about a handheld game console, or game console for that matter, that is relatively hard to find games for, it only makes sense that the games are also expensive. After all, low inventory, high demand, right? It's basic economics. But unfortunately, I can say that this is not necessarily the cheapest handheld console to collect for. In fact, some of the most expensive games that I own and have ever paid for happen to be on the N-Gage. After all, very low inventory, high demand, it's basic economics. After all, the most expensive game that I own in the game collection happens to be Civilization. This is a game that is worth about $1,000 complete in box. I picked this game up a few years ago for about $662 from an eBay auction, and I remember I told somebody, I bet if I tried to sell this game for $1,000 on eBay, I probably could get $1,000 for it on eBay. And as I've checked over the years, I've seen the game go for literally $1,000 on eBay, and people are willing to pay the price to pick up a game such as this for $1,000. But I'll give you guys a little spoiler alert for what this game has to offer. It's not worth $1,000. Trust me, it's not. But I will say, if you are talking about consoles and handhelds that aren't necessarily cheap to collect for, N-Gage is one of them. Now, thankfully, most games on the N-Gage are not going to be $1,000 or several $100s. After all, there are games such as Tomb Raider, Sonic N, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, games such as those that are going to be around $30, $50, $60 to pick up. But overall, I would say an N-Gage is not necessarily a budget handheld to collect for. Now, of course, another problem that is worth talking about when it comes to collecting and playing for the N-Gage is the fact that this isn't necessarily the most comfortable console and handheld to play on. At least with me personally, right? So let's take another handheld, for example, that was very successful during the 2000s and talk about the Game Boy Advance. After all, I have to say this was a relatively straightforward and easy handheld to play on, and I didn't feel uncomfortable playing it. Obviously, the buttons go in pretty well, and your D-pad works pretty well. Triggers, start, select. This is a pretty straightforward and relatively comfortable handheld to play on. However, let's take a look at the N-Gage. I don't have the original N-Gage model, as you can see, but I do have the QD model. And I have to say, this isn't necessarily the most comfortable handheld to play on. Sure, the D-pad is all right, but if you look right here, lots of numbers that you have to press. After all, Nokia was going for not just a gaming handheld to play on, but to also make this a cell phone as well. So if you are playing a game such as Sonic N, you really kind of have to press down. And I don't know if you guys can see the way that I'm putting like my thumbs onto the buttons and all that, it doesn't really feel as comfortable as the Game Boy Advance. This isn't really a handheld that I could realistically see myself playing for a long time. There have been cases where obviously I have fired the thing up and played a few games on it, but I have to say that overall this isn't necessarily the most comfortable handheld to play on. So yeah, if you are looking for comfort while playing a handheld,
I'm not gonna recommend the N-Gage for that. Not a bad handheld to play on. After all, there are some pretty decent titles on the N-Gage, but for the most part, this isn't necessarily a comfortable handheld to play on.
Hey guys, thank you so much for checking out my video. Please be sure to check out these videos here, here, and here. After all, I post a lot of content when it comes to game collecting tips, and other video game related subjects. So be sure to keep an eye out every Monday and Friday where I upload consistently, and I'll be seeing you guys next time.